Welcome. In this lecture, we're going to look at Chapter 7, Towards the Late Baroque Instrumental Music. Baroque instrumental music. So one of the main terms we want to look at when talking about Baroque music is idiomatic writing. And that's the idea that when we write for certain instruments, we're going to use the strengths of those instruments. An example of the idiomatic writing would be writing repeated notes for stringed instruments. It's very easy for stringed instruments to play repeated notes because you're going right back and forth from bowing on a string. Let's listen to this example of idiomatic writing. And that's an example from Vivaldi's violin concerto, the Spring Concerto. Another aspect that comes out of the Baroque era is a paper or a treatise called the Doctrine of Affections. And the Doctrine of Affections talks about the aesthetics of music and emotion in the Baroque time. And one of the topics in this doctrine was that instrumental music should be used or modeled after vocal music. Vocal music has vibrato, so we would use instrumental music would use kind of vibrato as well to invoke emotion. Other aspects that we would use in instrumental music would be the idea of a tremolo, which is repeated notes going back and forth. It would depict rage. Trills or ornaments would depict happiness or a cheerful mood. Let's listen to these two examples, the first being the tremolo and then the second being trills. Tremolo is this. And then we have the trills. Continuing talking about Baroque instrumental music, we're going to look at the Baroque orchestra. And obviously, with the orchestra, the predominant family of instruments is going to be the stringed instruments. The violins, the violas, the cello, and then the bass. We're going to still have the harpsichord as a major component to the orchestra, and the harpsichord is going to function as playing the basso continuo, where it's going to be rolling those chords with the bass line being presented in the works. And then over the course of time, over the period, you're going to start to see woodwinds being added, trumpets, French horns being added to the orchestra, and then timpanis as well. So continue our discussion about Baroque instrumental music. We're going to listen to the Rondo from the Suite of Symphonies by Jean-Joseph Moreau. This piece was written in about 1729. It's noted for its instrumental color. It uses the trumpets. Now, Rondo form, let's talk about that first. This is a form, it's going to be an A, B, A, C, A form. And this form is it's also called a 5-part rondo form because it has 5 different parts. This is a form we want to be familiar with because it is going to come back in the classical period and the romantic period, and we're going to be talking about rondo form again and again. Now, with this piece, it's from a suite de symphonies, so it's going to be from a series of pieces, and the form from the A section to the B section, it's contrasting. Okay, the A section is different than the B section, and one of the main ways that Moreau does that is through instrumentation. Where the A section is going to be loud, it's triumphant. He's using strings, trumpet. He's got the timpani. But the B section is going to be soft. There's no trumpet. There's no timpani. It's just strings and woodwinds. Then we go back to this A section again, which is very, very boisterous. It has the trumpet, same material as the opening. And then the C section again, it's different material, but it's soft and it's using the strings and the woodwinds again. Let's go through and let's listen to each of these sections. And what I want you to do is listen for the differences. So the A section is this. Again, it's kind of triumphant, it's loud, it's boisterous, it's got the timpani, the strings, the trumpets. Now let's listen to the B section and listen how different it is and what is Murray doing to have really to contrast from the A section. And finally, let's listen to the C section. And it's going to be soft and similar to the B section again. Let's listen to that. Okay, now that we have like an overview of rondo form and we're getting familiar with the music from this rondo, let's go back and what I want you folks to do is listen to the entire piece all the way through and be able to identify each section and so forth. So now we're going to look at Johann Pachelbel's Canon in D. And this is a piece that you guys have heard before, guaranteed. It gets played on the TV, it's played in mass media, and if you've ever been to a wedding, I'm sure it's a very, very popular piece that gets played at weddings these days. And so first off, let's talk about Johann Pachelbel. He's a composer, he's a Baroque composer. He's a very, very prolific composer, known for writing for harpsichord and known for writing organ music. This piece is going to be, it's a canon played by the three violins, and it has a basso continuo underneath. And before I talk to it, let me talk about the basso continuo first. So if you look over here, it says repeated bass line, basso ostinato. So it's the same bass line over and over and over again. The bass line is static, okay? And what we want to listen to as listeners, we listen to the melodies as they get presented by each of the three violins, and they're going to be done through what we call canon. So the first violin will start with a melody and play it, and then the second violin will play the same exact melody while the first violin starts to ornament over top of it. A canon is very, very similar to the idea of row, row, row your boat, where if one person starts singing row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, and then halfway through another person starts singing row, row, row your boat, and then the harmonies or the melodies they work together. This is the same type of concept. Secondly, this is a polyphonic piece. So keep that in mind. All through these three voices are basically playing in polyphony. And then the third thing we want to listen to is you want to listen to how the melodies get more complex or more ornate as the piece evolves. Let's listen to the bass line. I'm going to play that for you. Now with the violin coming in. Now the second violin comes in while the first one plays again. And now the third violin will hear. Okay, so you get a little bit of the canon in D. What I want you folks to do is now go online and let's listen to the entire canon. It's about 5 minutes long, um, and the version I have is going to have a organ, it's going to have a harpsichord and a bass playing as well. Another genre that we're going to talk about is the Baroque concerto. Now, a concerto, it's an instrumental genre in which one or more soloists play against the larger orchestra. And in the Baroque era, there's going to be two types of concerto we're going to look at. The first is a solo concerto, which you'd have a soloist versus the orchestra. You could have a violin, maybe you could have a flute, and then you have the orchestra playing to accompany the soloist. The second type of concerto is called a concerto grosso, and that's where you have a small group of soloists and then it's pitted against the orchestra. You may have two violins and a flute and then the orchestra. You could have a harpsichord, a flute, and an oboist and an orchestra. Okay. And the idea with the concerto grosso, that small group of soloists, it's called the concertino. Okay. And if it was just a solo person playing, it would just be the soloist. Another term that gets associated with concertos is the idea of tutti. And tutti is it's Italian, means everybody, and that just means when the entire ensemble is playing, the soloist and the orchestra, it's everyone's playing, and that's a tutti. Okay. Now, one thing that we're going to see that's true about Baroque concerto is, and most concerto in the classical and Romantic period, is they have just three movements. Now, when we get to the classical period, we'll look at symphonies that have four movements, and we'll look at sonatas that have four movements, but the concertos will still only have three movements. And again, as I said, think about it as sections of a book. The opening movement is a fast movement. This middle section of a concerto, it's a slow movement, and then the final section's a fast movement again. Okay. With solo concertos, they definitely continue in the classical and romantic periods. They definitely it's a way of showcasing a soloist's talent and their virtuosity and whatnot. Now, in continuing talking about the Baroque concerto, one of the most important people that we need to talk about is a composer by the name of Antonio Vivaldi. And Vivaldi was a virtuoso violinist. He was a composer, and he was probably one of the most important and prolific composers of the Baroque concerto. And he wrote over 450 concerto. That's a significant amount of concerto. He did have a nickname. His nickname was the Red Priest due to his red hair. He also was a priest. That's how. And one of his main functions was he taught at an orphanage and convent for young women in Venice. And keep in mind, he taught music to these girls. He taught them how to play violin. He taught them how to play stringed instruments. And during this convent, they actually had their own orchestra as well. And so what Vivaldi would do is he would write these concertos for his orphanage, and they would perform these concerto every year. And these kids were not just good; they were really, really professional. There was a high class orchestra, and word gets out that that this orphanage is they're putting on these concerts with these girls, and they're playing these dynamic concerto, and people come from all over the world to Venice to hear these girls play. And that's how and that's kind of how that's one of the reasons why he wrote 450 concerto, because he's writing for his students. And these concerto, the solo parts are very, very difficult. They're challenging. So, and it would have been something to see these girls play. So let's keep that in mind. Now, when we talk about concertos, the main form that's associated with the concerto is the ritornello form. And what happens with this form? Well, ritornello, it means to return. And so it's all a part of the main theme. It's going to be played by the entire ensemble. And then the solos will play. And then the entire ensemble will come back and play again. And it's going to be this alternation of the entire ensemble called tutti versus the soloist versus the entire ensemble versus the soloist. Okay. Um, if we had a concerto grosso, it would be the entire ensemble, then the concertino, which is that small group of people, and then the entire ensemble. Okay. And this is a way of, in Baroque art, we have the contrast between light and dark. And it's usually very, very evident. You'll see a very, very bright side of a painting and then some dark side. And in Baroque concerto, we have this contrast through the timbres of the orchestra versus the soloist of the concertino. So this form, this ritornello form, is mostly used in the first and third movements. Okay, the fast movements of the concerto. The middle movement doesn't use this form. Okay, so please keep that in mind. So the terms we want to remember is the ritornello, which means return, and it's the main orchestral section. Okay, tutti means everybody, so the soloist and the orchestra will be playing at the same time. And then the concertino is a term that's associated with a concerto grosso. It's that small ensemble or a small group of the soloist versus the orchestra. So the piece we're going to look at is Vivaldi's Violin Concerto called The Spring. It was written in 1725, and it's one of four concertos called The Seasons. And with this piece, this is one of the best examples of program music or programmatic music. And what programmatic music is, it's music that tells a narrative. This piece represents feelings and sounds and the sights of spring. How does Vivaldi do this? Well, he's going to use a lot of idiomatic writing for these strings. He's going to use tremolos, trills. He's going to have trills to mimic birdsong. He's going to have oscillating tremolos to have babbling brooks, and fast minor scales to mimic the thunderstorms. Okay. And this piece is a great example of good string writing. Okay, he's using the strengths of the string ensemble. Okay, it's also going to make use of terrace dynamics. And if you remember, terrace dynamics are going really, really from something really, really loud abruptly to something really, really soft. Okay, and it's also going to use melodic sequence. So let's listen to these examples. The first is terrace dynamics. And you could hear it started out loud, and then the second time around it was softer. Let's listen to the melodic sequence. And a melodic sequence is having a melody or motive, and it's played over and over again, but it will be maybe a step lower each time or a step higher each time. Let's listen. Now let's go and let's listen for birdsong. Now let's listen to the babbling brooks. And then finally, let's listen to the thunderstorms. So continuing talking about Vivaldi's Violin Concerto, it has a sonnet accompanying it. And what Vivaldi's going to do is he's going to try and paint a musical picture with imagery from the sonnet. Let me read the sonnet for you. So it says, Spring with all of its festiveness has arrived, and the birds salute it with a happy song, and the brooks kissed by the breezes. Meanwhile, flow with sweet murmurings. Dark clouds cover the sky, announced by bolts of lightning and thunder. But when all has returned to quiet, the birds commence to sing once again their enchanted song. So let's look at the form real quick, and then I want you to go back to Canvas and watch the entire concerto through. Okay. So if we look at the concerto, you're going to see the form is going to be the ritornello, soloist, ritornello, soloist, ritornello, soloist, ritornello, soloist, and it's going back and forth. Again, remember that return as we talked about. And then below each of these solo sections, it's going to be Vivaldi mimicking these different parts. He's going to mimic the singing birds. He's going to mimic the storming brooks. He's going to mimic the storm coming, causing that chaos. Then the singing birds are going to come back, and then we're going to have spring, and we're going to have joy and happiness. Okay. So that's kind of the form of this piece. Okay, it's a programmatic piece. So the narrative follows the sonnet, but the form of the concerto is a ritornello form. Okay. So with this, let's hear the first ritornello. Okay, that's going to be the major ritornello. Okay, and that ritornello is going to come back in ritornello 2 and ritornello number 3. Ritornello number 4 is going to be in minor, okay? And well, why is it minor? Well, we just had a major storm, and there's thunder and lightning, so he brings us back in a minor key to try and, again, paint that picture of that storm. Let's listen to the minor version. Okay, so we hear it in minor, and then we have two different other versions down here. Let me play them for you, so you get kind of used to the melodies. So when we go back to listen to the piece, you're much more familiar with it. So the ritornello again. And then the ritornello 2, part 2, I should say. It sounds like this. Now that you guys are fully versed on Vivaldi's Spring Violin Concerto, what I want you to do is to go back and I want you to listen to the whole thing all the way through and then follow along. Okay. So we're coming to the end of Chapter 7. So just to recap some of the items that we talked about, we went into terminology like idiomatic writing. What does that mean? We're writing for the strengths of instruments. We looked at the rondo from the Sweetest Symphonies by Moreau, and we want to know what rondo form is, and it's going to be, that A, B, A, C, A form. We looked at the Pachelbel's canon in D. We want to go back and listen to it online. We want to be familiar with the canon and know that it's a polyphonic piece. And then finally, we looked at Vivaldi's Violin Concerto. We want to know that it's a programmatic piece because it's trying to invoke imagery of spring. We also want to know that it's using the ritornello form that's going to keep coming back again. So these are a couple things that we want to you want to take away from this lecture. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you guys again.